happen.
Yes, it does.
Well, good evening, everybody. Welcome to another session of Bother the Father, open forum. Any questions you may have, I hopefully have the answer, or maybe direct you to where the answer may be. Who knows? But who would like to start us off? Not everyone wants. Everyone, come on.
Okay,
Yeah.
I just was waiting to see if Ken had a question. Okay. What are the requirements to have a Catholic wedding at a Catholic church? Does one person have to be Catholic or do both?
Great, yeah. Okay, first off, maybe let's look at the sacrament itself, right? This might answer the question in some ways, right? So the sacrament of holy matrimony is odd.
Okay.
And so every sacrament, every sacrament has sacramental grace associated with it, right? And so the sacramental grace for marriage is kind of threefold. You know, it's sacramentality, meaning God is leading the couple in their lives. From that leading of God in their life, there's a unification, a bond, a unity between the two people. And from that unity, other people come, right? So to have that happen, right, there has to be kind of three levels of this requirement to meet that standard. So a wedding would have to be licit, valid, and then sacramental, right?
Okay.
So in order to be licit, all that really would require is that the laws of the particular region are followed. So canon law dictates that, like for instance, like for age, all canon law says that to get married, you have to be above the age of reason. So what age is that? Well, typically 7, but that seems kind of odd, right? Most states, most municipalities would have a requirement of at least 16 with parental consent and 18 without, right? So that's just legal, right? That, okay, you have to follow the law. Validity is based on 3 things. Capability, meaning that the two participants are in their right mind and they understand the goods of marriage and what they're saying yes to. There's no impediment to that, meaning there's no, like, let's say addiction, or there's something else that causes that they're not to actually give the second C, which is consent, right? Consent would also be associated with the form of the sacrament, which we'll talk about in a second. And finally, the context. Now, what that means is, for a Catholic, they are obligated by canon law to have their marriage witnessed by the church, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what that would mean is they would come to the church, they would have a minister of the church witness their marriage, or they would have that dispensed. And the only person who could dispense that would be the bishop, right?
Mm-hmm.
Sacramentality is actually based on the condition of the recipient and the minister of the sacrament. So when we talk about sacraments, there's always 4 elements to a sacrament, right? The matter, the form, the minister, the recipient. And this is where marriage is weird. Because what is the matter for the sacrament of holy matrimony? What is the stuff, the tangible thing?
The couple.
You have a male body and a female body, right? A man's body, a woman's body.
Okay.
That's the valid matter. What is the form of the sacrament?
The form of the sacrament.
It's always the words that are said by the minister.
Okay.
It's the couple's word.
The vows. The vows, right? Or the oaths, whatever you promises, however you want to put it.
Okay.
Then who's the minister?
People.
What people?
Well, the minister would be whoever the priest is.
Nope.
The witnesses. The
Nope.
Congregation.
Nope.
The couple.
The couple. The bride and the groom are the minister of the sacrament, and the bride and groom are the recipient of the sacrament. So holy matrimony is the only sacrament where the matter, the minister, and the recipient are all the same. So again, the purpose of the priest or the minister of the church is just to witness it, to make sure it actually is valid. Basically say, yep, they said their vows right, and it was all good, and we followed all the laws. I'm signing this document saying that's the case, and this would be then a valid marriage. Sacramentality depends whether the ministers or the recipients are baptized. So to that end, Catholics, right, we would hope they'd be baptized. And so if they're baptized and they do those three things, those three C's, and they follow the law, that automatically becomes a sacrament of marriage, right? So somebody asks, well, what about someone who maybe is an atheist or has never been baptized? Can they still get married in the Catholic Church? Yes. That also has to be dispensed by the bishop, which is called disparity of cult. But let's say that, so for that person who's not baptized, it wouldn't be sacramental. It could still be licit and valid, good. But for the baptized party, it would be then sacramental, right? So in other words, if you had an atheist and a Catholic and they got married, well, for the Catholic, it's sacramental for sure. For the atheist, it would be valid and licit. And once that person becomes baptized, then it becomes sacramental for that person, right? So who can actually get married in the Catholic Church? Well, only one of those people would have to be Catholic in order to get married in the Catholic Church.
But one has to be.
One has to be, at least baptized Catholic,
Okay.
right? So that would,
Practicing?
not necessarily.
Okay.
So it'd be better if they were.
Correct.
But all that's required to have your marriage witnessed by the church is that one of the ministers and recipient is baptized.
Okay.
Right.
And do you have to have a mass?
No. Mass, and as a matter of fact, if it were a situation where it was a Catholic and a non-Catholic, we would actually probably require you not have mass, just so you don't alienate the non-Catholic parties that are present, right? So that would basically look like a liturgy of the word.
Mm-hmm.
Then you have, basically the wedding rite.
Vows.
Then you just go right into the Our Father, the nuptial blessing, and dismissal.
Mm-hmm.
So for instance, if you go down to the college church,
Mm-hmm.
that's all they do,
Mm-hmm.
even if you're Catholic,
Mm-hmm.
which is maybe a different discussion, but whatever.
Yeah.
But yeah, obviously the idea would be you have two Catholics, right? I mean, but that's also kind of an interesting situation too, because to actually be married, all that's required is that the non-Catholic party understand the obligations of the Catholic party. So the obligations for the Catholic party is that they would strive to get their spouse to heaven. They would be a good example of faith to their spouse. And if there are any children, they would do their best to raise the children Catholic.
Okay.
Now, what's interesting about that is the non-Catholic party doesn't have to agree to that. They just have to understand it. That, okay, well, that's your job.
Mm-hmm.
I don't like it. I don't want it, but I understand that's your job. Which is why it's probably better if the two parties are Catholic, or at least open to it, because that makes life a little bit easier down the road.
Right.
But still, we would still trust in the grace of the sacrament of marriage to form that bond and grow and help. In those, I would say, two of my sisters are married to non-Catholics. They were both married in the Catholic Church. I think one is more open, the other one is less.
Mm-hmm.
So, I think every family has that experience these days. And that's kind of unfortunate, because I think back in the day, there was sort of like this movement to say, yep, can't come in unless you're Catholic. Mm-hmm. And I think that was more towards the good of the couple, saying like, look, it's just better for you this way, which isn't wrong. Mm-hmm. But to deny somebody that sacrament because of that, it's a violation. Right? You can say, I'm not going to witness marriage for other reasons, like, hey, you have some addictions here. You might want to look at that before we actually witness your marriage. Or, you know what, it seems like you have a history of cheating. You want to look at that before you actually, get hit.
Yeah.
So I myself have not denied witness to marriage. I do know priests who have, mm-hmm. for other valid reasons. Mm-hmm. But all that would mean is the church's representative, you could choose another. Right, who would be willing. And that's, again, it's one of those things where there's kind of a difference of opinion whether marriage is obviously a gift, but two people who have right mind and understand the obligations, the validity of the marriage actually depends on the minister and the recipient, right? So in other words, I'm just here to witness, make sure it's done right, mm-hmm. and make sure they were aware of what those things are. Otherwise, it's kind of up to you, right? As the minister and the recipient of the sacrament, right? Mm-hmm. So it can be very difficult. So to that end, there can be certain scenarios that become very in the weeds, right? Mm-hmm. So for instance, let's say you have two Lutherans get married in the Lutheran church. Okay. Is it licit? Is it valid? Is it sacramental?
I would say yes.
For all three.
Yeah, for all three.
Well, if they follow the rules, it's listed.
They're following the law.
What was the other one? The middle one?
Validity.
Oh, validity.
Valid, yeah, I think,
So are those three C's present? Capacity,
Yes.
consent, and context.
I
or
think the
quorum.
question would be, is it sacramental because it's not Catholic?
Well, remember, the sacramentality of a marriage depends on the condition of the minister and recipient. So provided they're baptized,
Yeah,
they'd be sacramental.
well, I guess it would have to be then.
Well, I mean, maybe. I don't know what the Lutheran Church would say about
I
that.
don't know.
But again, I mean, we would say yes, that is a valid and sacramental marriage, right?
So in that case, if you ever wanted to have it annulled, it is valid, so you can't.
Right.
Use
So
that
so
argument.
yeah. So okay. So good. Let's say that marriage were to break up for whatever marriage, or get divorced, and one of the spouses meets a Catholic, and they would now get married in a Catholic church. We wouldn't just say, "Oh, well, you're a Lutheran now; you're married a Catholic, so it's all done." Now there is something called the Petrine privilege. They would have to go all the way to Rome to have that edict given, but that would not even meet the criteria of the Petrine privilege, because in order for that to meet that requirement, the person that is marrying the Catholic would actually have to become Catholic themselves,
Oh,
right? So there would still be a full annulment assessment there, right? That we're like, well, was one of those, and it's important to understand this too, when it comes to annulments, all the annulment is looking at is those three C's, right? So was one of them lacking in some way, right? So in other words, well, you didn't in the proper form as you understood it as a Lutheran. So we can't say the context wasn't there. Now, provided you said the words correctly and meant them, we couldn't necessarily say the consent is there. A lot of annulments kind of hinge on that first C, capacity. So in other words, you fully understand what marriage was. Were you open to the gifts and the goods of marriage? Were there any impediments before or during the time you were making your consent? Were you fully developed as a mature adult to actually make that consent, right? So a lot of the discussion around annulments kind of are kind of hovering around that first C typically, right? So yeah, if we had two Lutherans, they would break up and then marry Catholic. We would have to go through the full annulment process for that, because yeah, it's at least the outward appearance would be that is not only a valid marriage, it's also a sacramental marriage. And so the tribunal, the church, the ecclesiastical court would have proper authority to make that determination, right? Now, it gets a little bit easier in some ways when you get to, let's say, two atheists who were never baptized. They go down to the justice of the peace or to the court. They present their consent, everything signed. Is that illicit, valid, or sacramental marriage?
I would say yes.
For all three?
no.
Well, there was consent.
Yeah. So maybe that would be valid,
I don't think.
but they're not baptized.
Oh, okay. Well,
So sacramentality would not be
not
present.
that.
So we would say, yeah, as long as those three C's were there would be licity, it was done by the law, and there would be validity. And we wouldn't say it's sacramental, but we could say that's definitely a natural bond of marriage. The same marriage bond as Adam and Eve experienced, maybe, right? Because they were never baptized.
So you're saying if a couple is Catholic and goes to the justice of the peace and they're both baptized, it's sacramental?
No. So let's
Okay.
look at that then, right?
That's
so,
okay.
So
Yeah,
let's
okay.
say you have two. Let's put this. Let's take it a step further.
Okay.
Let's say you have a Catholic and a Hindu,
Okay.
and they go to the Hindu temple. They perform the rite of the Hindu faith, and they get married in the Hindu temple.
Okay.
Licit, valid, sacramental.
For who?
Correct.
Right.
So,
Right.
okay, let's say for the Catholic party.
No.
Not sacramental, for sure, because it's not valid.
It's not valid because it wasn't witnessed by a Catholic
Okay, now here's the thing though, right?
minister.
provided they didn't get
Unless they
that
got it
dispense, right?
dispensation,
So if
yeah.
they came to a Catholic priest beforehand and said, you know, Father, my spouse here is Hindu, their family isn't really open to the Catholic faith, it'd be for family harmony, we want to get married in the Hindu temple, can we dispense of that requirement? We would fill out a prenuptial investigation, send the reasoning to the bishop would say, yeah, that makes sense. Okay. Now in that scenario, would it be illicit?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, no,
Would
it's illicit and valid.
valid, and would it be
Sacramental.
sacramental?
Yes, because the Catholics baptized.
Right. Yes. Right. So yeah, two Catholics have that obligation, or the Catholic party has that obligation to not get married in the church, have that context or that forum aspect dispensed by the bishop. And they would do that through their parish priest or some other priest, or even go to the bishop directly. That's fine too.
So then if they didn't have it dispensed, then
It
would
is
not
not,
be valid.
it may be illicit, but it definitely isn't valid, and it surely is not sacramental because it is not valid.
So then if they split up, would not be an annulment.
So, well, right. Well, there still would be, but
Really?
the process is called lack of form.
Okay.
So let's say that the Hindu and the Catholic broke up.
Mhm.
The Catholic says, what was I thinking? I really should marry a Catholic. They come to the priest and say, Father, guess what?
I saw them.
Even though I even got that dispensed, let's say, right?
Okay.
But, you know, I there were some problems there. The bond was never really, established. And we didn't get married in the church. We got married in the Hindu temple. Wonderful. Lack of form. You have now officially been decreed annulled because you did not have the official context given, right? Now there might be a little caveat there where we have to go to the bishop to approve that.
Yeah, because they had it.
Because if the bishop had dispensed, he would have to give that authority. But those kind of cases actually are relatively easy. Those kind of things only take maybe like a week.
See, the majority of us, we don't even know this unless we're involved in it.
Well, that's the thing too, Ken. I mean, we had 6 courses on canon law when we were in the seminary about these things. So, and even then, we're also trained as advocates typically, right? So, I mean, yeah, we kind of know these things because we're trained to. But you're right, most people don't know because, and here's the thing about it, right? I don't necessarily talk with couples about annulment because that's not the point, right? We don't really want that for you. We actually want you to have a valid and healthy and holy marriage. And so we're going to try to help you to do that, and give you some maybe strategies to help with that. But usually annulments don't come up unless it's actually necessary.
Right.
I think the tragedy we really see today is that a lot of people don't even seek out the annulment, right? For whatever reason they have, whether it be like money, or maybe it's just too hard, or maybe it's just too difficult to bring up those things. But the thing about it, and this is what I tell people that come for annulments, is that the process is difficult, but it's not difficult to make you feel bad about yourself or to put shame on you or anything else. It's meant to have closure and healing. That's the point of the annulment process, right? And I would say a good, especially nowadays, I think a good number that receive these annulments and go through the process are happy they did.
And do you have to have both parties involved in it?
For annulment, no. You only need one party.
Okay.
The other party does have the opportunity to engage if they so desire.
Okay.
But there's also different processes for that too. So for instance, if both parties are Catholic, let's say, and they both agree on the circumstances of nullity, meaning, we're both just immature and we were dumb and we just didn't realize, and it got really hard and we didn't realize how hard it was going to be.
Mm-hmm.
We both agree with that, and we want each other to have a good life. We just knew we were not. This bond was never really there. That's actually a very easy process. It's actually a shorter process, but usually when it gets kind of, and I've had a few cases like this where sometimes it becomes vindictive, and the other spouse, instead of wanting to just get over this and move on, they want to make it a big deal. And really, what comes down to it, they don't want to blame themselves.
Right.
They want to make it seem like it's the other person's fault.
They don't want to take any
It's like-
responsibility.
And that's why I always tell people too when they come for annulments, it's also good to be honest to these things,
Right.
and even self-reflective, and say, here's how I contributed to this bond not being established. Because that's actually going to go over a lot better than it was all his fault. I never had any problem. Now there's some cases where that is the case. Maybe a spouse had some addiction. they were stepping out on you. It was just too much, and you couldn't take it anymore. It was causing you, maybe even physical stress, right? And we could say, yeah, we still trust in the grace of the sacrament there, but yeah, there are circumstances that were maybe there again before the wedding or at the time of the consent that was an impediment that maybe the other person didn't even know about.
Yeah, because if it wasn't there before, then you can't get the
Yeah.
annulment.
Right.
Cheryl had to have an annulment. She was married at 16 to an older gentleman, and there was just lots.
That seems pretty clear.
And her ex-mother-in-law was very helpful, and she told Cheryl right away, well, whatever the church wants,
Yeah.
I'll be there for you,
Yeah.
and whatever. And, we had our first date in New Year's Eve of '76. We were engaged April the 1st and married October 29th, 1977. And it all flowed and worked, very well.
Yeah.
And, I wasn't involved in it at all.
Yeah, usually it's only the parties that were engaged in what they call the attempt at marriage to begin with. And so, yeah, I mean, a lot of that also too, usually for the full moment, what they call the petitioner and the respondent typically have to come up with 3 witnesses too. And so really the job of the witness is just say, yeah, we saw these things, or some witness just like, I don't really remember, I don't know.
I don't
remember
if the ex had to participate. He was incarcerated.
Yeah, and oftentimes, again, they don't necessarily have to. I mean, they have the opportunity to, but if they don't want to, they don't have to.
It went rather fast.
Yeah.
And
usually those do go fast because there's usually a little less kind of like he said, she said. There's less discernment involved with that. It's sort of like, okay, well, we're going to take certain facts for what they're being stated here as face value. Oftentimes there will be a psychologist or psychiatrist involved, especially when it comes to levels of addiction or emotional or psychological traumas, to kind of get what they call the opinion for the court. And so then it goes to the full tribunal. Usually the judge would sit on that, look at all the evidence, make a decree. After all the evidence is actually gathered in, the advocate with the petitioner and as well as the respondent have an opportunity to look at all the information. They can also then submit another brief based on that information to rebut or whatever.
Yeah.
And then the judge will take everything and say, okay, here's what we're going to do. Right? So at the tribunal, there's usually the advocates, but then there's also the defender of the bond, who's sort of like the prosecutor. So that the job of the defender of the bond is to say, give evidence and give argument that the bond should not be dissolved. Right? And again, that's important because it's funny how the church is always very skeptical, and that's a healthy skepticism, right? Is wants to make sure that's actually true, right? The judge, the church doesn't do anything hastily, especially when it comes to things like sacraments. And then I would say these days there's a good majority of annulments that actually get granted. Now, sometimes what will happen though is when an annulment is decreed, there could be certain stipulations for the person if they try to get married again, right? Depending on what the circumstances were. I think those are kind of few and far between, but I've had a few where it's just like, yeah, they might want to work on this before they actually engage in another, bond. It just it kind of depends. The process is rather fascinating, I think. I personally kind of enjoy working on annulments because it's sort of like a mystery case. It's like, okay, what was missing here? What was going on? So they can be I don't want to say entertaining. That's not the right word, but they can be somewhat fulfilling. I mean, they can be because you're also helping people.
You're counseling
Right.
as well.
That would be a challenge.
They can be challenged. That's true. That's true.
Yeah. Well, I know with my brother, his one regret today is that the priest that married them is already in heaven, we assume. And he did not want to marry them. He told him he wouldn't marry them because this is when the diocese just started. You had to do those testing and all of that.
Yeah.
And his wife to be finished very low on the testing. And he probably was a little low too. And the priest said, I'm not going to marry you. And my brother said, well, you don't have to marry us. I'll find somebody that will.
I mean, honestly, that's true. You
And
can.
I guess,
right.
I guess good old father thought about it and he went ahead and married him.
Okay.
Well, if they make it till next October, they'll be married 50 years.
Oh, praise
and
God.
my brother says, I wish he was still
Well,
here.
the thing about it is so there's different kind of those what they call surveys nowadays. The problem that one's probably the focus survey. I imagine that's
I
kind of
don't
the
know.
more oldest one.
It just has started
Yeah.
all this. And
There are some that are more contemporary, and I think it's also important to understand. I understand when it first came out. I think there was a lot of probably stock put into it.
yeah.
Yeah.
But the point of those is not to like, hey, you're ready for marriage. This is a test. If you don't pass, you're not going to. It's really meant to actually open discussion between the spouses.
Right. Well,
So I always approach it that way. Like we look at when we have focus surveys with married couple or engaged couples, we kind of look at okay. Usually those things they kind of ask a question, and the way they ask the question is sort of cryptic because they want to see how the person answers, right? And then they can engage in a deeper discussion. So one of my favorite questions on the old focus survey, I think it's on some of the other ones now too, is as long as we love each other, there'll be no problems in our marriage.
oh,
I love that question. I think it's the best question on the entire survey because ultimately one of them says agree, but the preferred answer, of course, is disagree because what that's trying to show is okay, look, love is good. Can be helpful to get over problems, but to say there's going to be no problems in your marriage,
oh, Lord.
that is just Pollyanna. That is just fiction, right? Nobody's going to have no problems in whatever lifestyle they live, right? So it's really kind of getting at like, okay, are you realists here? Do you actually understand what this is all about? And I love it. I just love it because I can bring that up in the conversation, and then typically you see the oh yeah, okay, I guess that's what it meant. It's a wonder. I love that question. It's my favorite one.
I'll always remember my youngest, well, she was my oldest sister, but she's younger than me. She was the first to get married in a family. And she got ready to walk out of the house to go to the church. And my mom said, wait a minute. I got two advice things for you. You don't bring your marital problems here because you know we've had ours here. And you never come here and ask for money because you know there's no money.
There's wisdom there.
I've always remembered that, But well, yeah, marriage it's a hard thing to live, and it takes a lot of give and take. And I get tickled at these people who say, well, marriage is a 50-50 proposition. And I look at them, I said, I can honestly tell you, there's times I felt like I was doing the 95.
Yeah, sure.
And they were doing the 5.
Sure.
And I'm sure there was times that the other party my wife felt the same way. She was at 95. And, it's a lot of give and take.
Sure.
And you have to learn to say, I was wrong.
Right. Well, I mean, I think it goes to show that all the sacraments of service, right? All our vocations, they lead to the cross. Whether it's married life, whether it's sacramental life, whether it's priesthood, or even the charitable single life, right? That leads to sacrifice, right? That we're called to sacrifice for others, and whether it be an individual that we've engaged in a bond with, or whether it's a whole parish or a community or the poor or whoever it may be, that requires us to actually suffer. I mean, we understand suffering is good.
Right.
There's a good that can come from that. Right? This is self-sacrifice. That's ultimately what Jesus does for us. So in that way, we actually follow in his footsteps, right?
Well, and it certainly helps any couple if they not only invite but let God into their
No,
life.
for sure. Right. Well, that's why those goods are kind of established that way. It's funny when we talk to couples about those 3 ends of marriage: the sacramentality, unity, procreation. I think most people, when they say which one is, there is a hierarchy there. And when you say which one is the most important, I think most people say, well, procreate. Well, yeah, I mean that's important, but we understand the grace of marriage helps you be good parents as well as good spouses. But if you're not letting God lead you in your life, your bond is not going to be full, right? And if that bond is not full, there's problems with that. having children aren't going to help that, right, or solve it. And as a matter of fact, you're going to probably do damage to those children if you actually are not engaged in that bond. So the sacramentality is the most important part. It's putting God in our life, letting Him lead us. And then with this other person that I've engaged with in this bond, now I'm living for the good of that other. And I think that's kind of interesting because I think a lot of people, especially those who have children, they would say, well, the most important person in my life is my children. No. The most important person in your life is your spouse. Because if you're living for her or living for him, you're automatically living for your children. That's going to come with it. And I don't know. I think our society today is looking at children as sort of, again, I think children are either prizes or something that we deserve, and we do anything else to get, or they're discarded and looked down as not something we want. And the problem with that is they're gifts. But also, it starts that one extreme where it's saying, I'm going to do everything I can to get a child. Well, that's a problem. Everything you should be doing should be directed towards that other person that you've got engaged in the bond with. And if you're doing that well, it'll happen, right? And even if it doesn't happen, you can still live that life of deep, deep love and friendship and be enlivening for other people around you, right? We hope, obviously, children come from every bond, but we also understand that that doesn't happen for everybody. And so in that circumstance, it's important to say, I'm really living for this other person and do everything I can for them, right?
I had an aunt and uncle that she was Catholic and he was not. He had his own religion, and they were married in the Catholic Church. I think, I can't say for sure, but she practiced her faith and he practiced his, and they had two children, and he allowed them to go to Catholic school. He was all for that, and I don't think they made their 50th anniversary, but probably come close to it, but I always respected how they made that work for them,
Yeah, I mean, I have a brother-in-law who, I'm not sure exactly what he practices. I think he was raised Baptist, but he doesn't really practice faith. But yeah, he's very open to, the kids are baptized and they go to Catholic school, and my sister is really engaged with her faith, so I think it's enlightening. And I've been trying to entice him to come to OCIA. I don't know. Maybe someday he might. Who knows? But I keep on praying for him. We'll see what happens.
Well,
yeah. But I just think, but I mean, they live that same thing. It's sort of okay, look. I think eventually, though, even for the sake of the kids, sometimes it turns to the point where if you want your children to engage in faith, especially in the faith, Catholic faith or whatever faith, the man's role in that is very, very important. It's funny. I know there's not too many studies, but there was one done, I think, in the Methodist Church, and they showed that for the people that were in their youth and actually maintained their faith all the way through their adulthood, what they found was 95% of them, it didn't really matter what the mother did, but the father, if the father was engaged with his faith, the children would be later in life. I know, of course, I know that's not completely,
it's not
inclusive, but I mean, I think it's interesting.
We always went to church on Sunday with my dad. Because there was always a house full of kids, and Mom always had a new baby, and she wouldn't go with us. And actually, we lived in a very small town not far from here, right on the 4 miles from where we lived was Alton, Illinois. So Mom would go over there to Mass because they had 11:30 Mass on a Sunday, and that way she could get whatever she had to do in the morning and breakfast for everybody, whatever, and she could go to Mass, But Dad, we went with him every Sunday, and one thing, and my mom, she always said, now when you kids, if you turn 5 or 6, because there was no kindergarten then, when the summer you were going to start school, then you had to start going to Mass on the weekends with Dad, And during that time, one of my brothers said, well, Mom, I'm not feeling good today. I can't go to Mass. Mom said, well, that's okay, you will stay home. But she says, you have to understand one thing. Your dad and I, we had a family outing planned for today. So if you miss Mass, you can't go on the family outing. And, well, I'm sick, Mom. Well, he was no more sick than man in the moon. And guess what? Dad took all of us on the family outing, and Mom stayed home with the child who was sick.
Sounds like seminary.
And I mean, there was 12 of us. There's 11 of us living, and I'm the only male that goes to the Catholic Church.
Yeah.
My one sister goes to the Catholic Church. And I have a brother that goes somewhere else, and the rest, they only go for weddings and funerals.
Yeah.
You know, but they can tell you everything that's wrong with the Catholic Church. And I say, well, how do you know that if you don't go? How do you know what's wrong with the Catholic Church?
Well, I always go look at the words of Peter in John chapter 6, and under that our life discourse. Lord, where can we go?
That's right.
I mean, yeah. So that's why I look at it.
I
mean, because here's the thing: the church has always had scandal. It's always been a little screwed up. It's always had issues, but that isn't the church; it's the people in it. And I always look back at I know I've said this before, but you know, back in the 19th century, when Napoleon was running through Europe, he was trying to convince a cardinal that, you know, he really didn't want to destroy the church, but his actions were kind of directed towards it. And he was talking to this cardinal in France, and the French cardinal said, "Your Excellency, I don't think you're going to destroy the church. We've been trying to do it for the last 1,800 years, and we haven't succeeded. I doubt you will either."
Right.
So, you know, that's how it goes. Any other questions, comments, concerns, heresies?
None.
No, I'll just be glad when the election's over.
Oh.
I'm just so sick of all of this.
Aren't we all?
And I do have my Amendment 3 signed in the yard.
Yeah, I was over at Newman today. I was actually yesterday. I realized the sign was not in the yard, and so I was like, "Oh, what happened?" I was like, "Oh, I don't know." So I brought him a new one. Hopefully, it's up and it'll stay up for a little while. We'll see. So, but I actually I have to say I'm actually very happy and impressed that our signs on here at St. Andrew at presentation haven't been tampered with at all. And I was even really encouraged. I put this in my bulletin article this weekend. I was really encouraged by the amount of people that seemed very supportive. They were driving down Natural Bridge, and all the people that were at the Life Chain.
They were.
Yeah, I was really surprised and happy about that.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I was very happy with the turnout.
Yeah.
And if we just change one person's mind,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah. It's an uphill battle. We got a battle ahead of us, but I think you know, again, it's recognizing the people here that have been hurt. I think that's hurt people, and I think a lot of that is, well, I think most of the people they're really, you know, for this amendment. They've probably been touched in some way by abortion, whether personally or tangentially, and I think that's where it's kind of a blindness, even recognition that it's actually wrong.
I think a lot of Amendment 3, though, I think a lot of it is people, you don't get the real story of what it, if you go to the senator's website, depending on which one, it doesn't tell you that there's abortion up to 9 months. It doesn't tell you all of those things.
You know,
That's
it's
why that
interesting.
Missouri Right to Life thing was good.
Right. The wording in it is that was the whole point from the beginning. That's why I went through the courts for so long, and also kind of sad that the court decided it was fine, because
more people are
it's just it is very vague. If you read it, you can interpret it many different ways. That's kind of part of the problem. Is that, you know, you can interpret it saying 9 months abortion. You take away liability for doctors where they can't be prosecuted for botched abortion or anything else. Parental consent.
That right there should be enough. Right. No.
Parental consent. I mean, and that not only just for abortion, but like that also can lead into, like, you know, irreversible surgeries that you won't have to get parents' consent to do. I mean, to maybe a lesser extent, but still, at least an action of material cooperation is that this will be funded by taxpayers, right? So as a Missouri taxpayer, your money that you give to the government will go towards it. And boy, I mean, that's difficult too, because if that were to pass, what's our obligation as Catholics? I mean,
pay taxes.
I mean, I'd be hard pressed to say like, well, that's an unjust. You're taking something that's mine and using it for an unjust cause. I cannot agree with that.
But that's why I think that the confusion is that there's really good Catholics out there that don't realize that abortion's gonna be allowed up to 9 months.
Well, that's the thing. I think some
period.
people look at it as just like, well, this is a women's health issue because they don't
Right.
use the word abortion in the
That's-
amendment. It's all about women's
Right.
health, and well, but
That's why
that's the problem.
what
That's a
they're
very
marketing.
vague term,
That's what they're marketing.
right? And the other issue there too is that it's also, well, how do you define that? There's no definition of that in the amendment of what women's health is. So, I mean, because I think anyone would say like, yeah, women should be healthy.
Right,
We want women to be healthy.
right,
We want also want them to have reproduction rights,
right.
meaning they have the right to reproduce. We want that. Yes,
Yeah.
that's good. But to call murder of a child in the womb health
Right.
is a contradiction in terms. And you could maybe, and you could be someone that says, well, as a, you can look at that, you can interpret that way. Yeah, you can, but the problem is you can interpret it the other way too. And as we all know, people that work with the law, lawyers, judges, they're going to interpret it to the way that's going to be the best for their client, whoever that may be. Right. So yeah, I think I think in general it's always kind of difficult when it comes to amendments. That's also why, I mean, this is not an immoral issue, but well, in some ways it is, I guess. That's why I'm also voting no on Amendment 2, personally. I don't know. To me, it seems like we have a lot of failing school districts in Missouri, and we're going to then reward them by giving them money from betting. I don't know if that's a good idea. Yeah.
And is it really gonna go there?
Right. You're right. Yeah. History has shown us that hasn't been the case. Right.
Yeah, that's why we had the casinos, right?
Right.
And look how that turned
Right.
out.
It's, well,
Yeah.
it's just a challenging world.
But also, the moral aspect of that is now you're condoning addictive behavior,
Addictive behavior, right,
that can be problematic for people.
right.
And you can say, oh, there's betting helplines. Okay. But can't we just say, like, let's do what's best for the common good? You know? I don't know. I don't know.
Too easy.
Well, I think we covered everything sufficiently. Any other questions, comments, concerns here? Before you log off from there. Very good. All right.
You know, I always enjoy coming and just, there's nothing else listening.
Oh, praise God.